Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Ji ayanu pakhair angale ni hao chunishume washmale. Ohio Gonzalez, Guten Morgen, hola, bonjour, privyet, kaifa hal? Hale Shumat Chature, ahlan wasal marhaba. Buna mucho gracias, swabi ab bhalli kare aaya. Hoş geldin and ayo sa khuyam aur achi batto chi hal jot kale mera khairutan and a very warm welcome to everybody who's tuned into PTV World and watching World this morning alongside my very well-learned colleague who happens to be Miss Haja Satti. I happen to be Shahzad Hasan Khan and we hope and pray that everybody out there is doing well and they're ready to kickstart their day with us. But first things first, hello Hajra, assalamu alaikum. How are you feeling today?
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much for introducing me. I think we are all feeling the heat of today's heat wave, I think, and according to Met Office, we are going to experience and witness the heat wave for, I think, 4 or 5 days, from 25th till 30th. And considering the situation of the heat wave in this regard, the government has also announced the holidays for the kids, and I think that's the best step that the government has taken because we can literally feel the heat out there. It is so hot out there. And living in Islamabad, I think it is becoming a new normal for us to experience these extremities and weather fallacies, particularly in these climatic changes, because in Islamabad, we were attuned to more moderate sort of a weather, right?
True.
We never experienced heat above 40 degrees, but now we are experiencing 45, 49. This is becoming a new normal. And in the winters, we would experience so much intense cold. But I think it is high time that we talk about it, and we will certainly talk about it because we have been talking about these climatic changes. But before that, I think, so I don't want to ask you that you brought us anything or not because I'm attuned to, you know.
I knew this question was coming up, yes.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure that I know what is going to be your answer.
All right, so okay. You know, so because everybody who's out there, you know, for all of those people who've been texting me why I wasn't on television for the last 20 days, well, I was on break, you know, I had to go to England, you know, there were other multiple countries that I was visiting due to my trip, and obviously the question was supposed to be there that whether I brought chocolates or not. I did bring chocolates, but I didn't bring them to office today.
Yeah,
which is why tomorrow, okay, so tomorrow on live television, I will be gifting you
Define tomorrow.
Yeah. Tomorrow,
what exactly is the definition
tomorrow,
of tomorrow?
Obviously, is going to be 22nd of May, ladies and gentlemen.
2024?
Yeah,
2025?
2024.
2026?
2024. And you will get your chocolates as well. Even today, I looked at them and I was like, okay, whether today or tomorrow. So I think that tomorrow all the team members will be here as well. So I think that it'll be best to kind of give that chocolate box in front of everybody else. And not just that. I think I've done it the past 2 times as well. Don't say that, yeah. You know, I think it was only on one occasion where I was unable to deliver the chocolate.
I think begging for 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, and constantly prodding and making us ashamed of begging, and then we got it. That was on a lighter note. And I think one of the things that is very much important, and we have talked about a lot, particularly not just relevant to Pakistani society, but across the world, because we've seen that how mental illnesses are across the globe on the rise. So you will find people are suffering from anxiety, from depression, from all of these things, and the trauma is one thing that is much talked upon. So there are lots of discourses that have been generated, and it has been always been there, but now the good thing is that there is a lot of awareness regarding that. And one thing that stands out in that entire conversation is, and I think we would also like to steer that conversation in that particular direction, is that according to medical sciences, according to psychotherapies, there's a lot of focus on the medication, there's a lot of focus on treating symptoms of the traumas and whatnot, but people don't talk about what causes the trauma in the first place. That is just things that are coming from the environment. So for example, racism, so for example, other pressures, the inflationary pressures, they are causing these sort of triggers that causes the trauma in the first place. So why not we talk about the environment in the first place and also then delve into it, because yes, medication is the answer, but again, the stresses are always out there in the environment. So what are we going to do about those stresses?
Exactly,
right?
And Haja, in addition to that, I think what happens is that, you know, with these stresses, obviously there will be change in your personality and the way that you look at things. Now, imagine that we have seen in recent times where people might have anger issues, you know, there might be more violence as well. You know, we talk about domestic abuse. That can be one of the reasons why people are kind of having these, you know, these are abnormal behaviors.
Generational trauma, you know, which is passed from father to son or from generation to generation, and people are unable to break that, right, or identify that in the first place. So it's very important we highlight what exactly is the mother trauma, what exactly is the father trauma, how does it manifest in your personality, and you're unaware of the symptoms that are residing in your body, and you're not allowing them to pass. They're blocking your the higher self, the access towards the higher self, right?
Exactly, and which is why, you know, ladies and gentlemen, we're very lucky that, you know, that the guests that we've joined us, or who have actually joined us today, have actually conducted like literally a training camp as well, or probably more than that, because now imagine that EMDR Pakistan over here has made sure that they're going to conduct this training session, which took place on the 18th and 19th of this month as well, 2024. And you know, it's a blessing in disguise for all of us, because imagine that, you know, after this conversation, you know, after this segment, people out there will be able to realize whether they've experienced behavioral changes or not, whether there were problems or not. So our initiative is to make sure to kind of speak with these amazing people, who one of them actually happens to be here for the very first time in the country, and then obviously the other person happens to be the president EMDR as well. So let's introduce them, let's get the conversation started. And for everybody who's out there, this conversation is basically to make sure that we are able to identify that whether there are people out there, you know, who might be having such behavioral changes, you know, psychotraumas, if we are to kind of talk about them, and how to identify and realize and how to get help. So ladies and gentlemen, to get started, we're very lucky that we've actually been joined by somebody who happens to be a psychotherapist, a clinical consultant and trainer. He is Mr. Mark Nickerson for the very first time in our motherland, Pakistan. Hello, assalamu alaikum, good morning.
Good morning. It's a privilege to be here. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you over here, and we'll certainly speak about your visit as well. But let us introduce the President EMDR Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen. She happens to be Dr. Savera. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saiba. How are you?
Walaikum assalam. Again, thank you so much for hosting us. And we're really excited to be here to use this platform, so we can help people think about how they can improve their mental well-being.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that, and I think we need to kickstart a conversation. So Mr. Mark, let's start from you. So we've seen that there's, I think there's a movement in the medical sciences as well to move away from medication and genetics and rather focus on the environment. So what are the things, stresses in the environment that causes the trauma in the first place, and how do you define trauma? I mean, yes, there is a fine balance, so that is sort of a healthy sort of a stress when you get, and that makes you excited to improve yourself, right? How do you identify the healthy stress, and how do you identify the trauma which resides?
Yes, so there is, as you say, what we might consider healthy stress and stress that's too much. And human beings can handle a lot and adapt and adjust, but many times people are overwhelmed by an experience. And what defines trauma in the simplest way is that it's an experience that continues to last in the mind and affect the person. So we know that when a bad thing happens, there's often a shock reaction. We freeze, our emotions tighten up, we can't think straight. And sometimes we get over that quickly, but sometimes it lasts for the rest of a lifetime. And this is what PTSD is. It's based upon an ongoing response to something that happened years ago.
Exactly, but Mr. Mark, you know, to kind of, you know, have an elaborate conversation on this, what we really need to kind of understand is that traumas will occur no matter what. You know, this is what we call life. There will be days, you know, when you'll be happier. There will be days when there will be such sad incidents which will be taking place.
Yes.
But for anybody to distinguish between, you know, what is healthy stress and what should we refer to as trauma is something which we are unable to do as of now, which is why we have people like you who come here to help us as well. So how do we identify that, okay, you know, this is a healthier stress and this is something which we really need to treat as trauma, and what impacts will it have on anybody's well-being, may it be mental, physical, social, spiritual, with, God forbid, if it's a trauma?
Yes. So often what makes it a healthy stress is somebody is aware of what they're dealing with, they have coping mechanisms, they have support, and so they feel like they can handle that adversity and grow from it.
Okay.
What makes it unhealthy and potentially lead to a lasting trauma is simply being overwhelmed. So for example, I know a lot of the activity in EMDR Pakistan started after the earthquakes in the late 2000s, and humanitarian relief groups came in here and helped people overcome an understandable trauma. Other trauma might be, as you say, violence in the home, accidents, different things that can happen to people physically, or a tragic death or loss. And these things, of course, will have an effect, but we define PTSD as when the effect lasts longer than 3 months. And the person is having flashbacks or symptoms in the present that suggest that they haven't gotten over that trauma.
All right.
Right. And Dr. Savera, now let's move conversation to you, since you're the president of the EMDR. So explain to us what exactly is the EMDR, and let's analyze it in the intersection or in the interplay of anxiety, of depression, and how do you cure that?
Thank you. So when a psychological trauma is something when something distressing or traumatic happens, it tends to leave a psychological wound. So it is like a wound that you can't see, but it's felt.
Right.
And it can lead to a shift in the person's perspective in terms of what they feel. So they may feel angry, scared, sad, or even numb and emotionally detached. And then there can also be a shift in the way that they view themselves and the world around them. And EMDR therapy aims to activate their own inner resilience, so our brain has its own natural healing powers. And that's what the adaptive processing is, what we aim to enhance during the EMDR therapy, for them to be able to see, so people who think of themselves as weak, as damaged, as unsafe, they're guided towards a healthier processing of those memories, and so the associated negative emotions, the negative thoughts, and the disturbance that they hold in their body, that is processed towards a healthier resolution, and it improves their overall quality of life.
Exactly, and we certainly, kind of the initiative is to kind of speak about it as well. But EMDR itself stands for eye movement destabilization and reprocessing, if that's what, desensitization and reprocessing.
Yeah.
So what does it have to do with eye movement? This is something which I would want to kind of understand for our viewers.
The body movement.
Can I take you back to how EMDR was first discovered?
Sure.
And it's a fascinating story. So Dr. Francine Shapiro, she was a clinical psychologist in the US.
Yep.
She was taking a walk in the park. And it's reported that she was having some personal troubles of her own, and those traumatic, distressing memories, she was holding on to them as she was walking along. And something interesting happened. She noticed that as her eyes were moving to and fro, just taking in her surroundings, there was an ease in the burden of those distressing memories that were in her mind.
With the eye movement.
With the eye movements, and that was sort of an aha, a light bulb moment for her.
Yeah.
And she said that there's something important going on here. And so she dug deeper, did research, trying to find out the underlying mechanisms, and that is how, just from a simple walk in the park, EMDR evolved into this complex, structured protocols that are used all over the world. And interestingly, as I'd like Mark answer, eye movements alone are now found to be not the only way to activate the natural healing powers of the brain.
Okay.
And so there are other ways that they can be activated, but the therapy had become so popular by the name of EMDR that that's what
But if
Shapiro
eye
went with.
movement can help you get better from whatever stresses you have, do you think that you can do the diagnosis with the eye movement as well, whether somebody has had trauma or not? Anybody?
Well, to add to what you said, there are natural eye movements, and when we think about REM sleep, during dream sleep, eyes move back and forth at a fast rate, and we associate dream sleep with recovering, being refreshed, that sort of thing. So to talk about unmanageable stress, when somebody can't sleep, they don't recover. When somebody can sleep deeply, natural processes help, and so EMDR seems to replicate that a little bit. But
please continue.
well, so to the trauma, when we think modern psychology tends to look at diagnoses, as it understandably should, anxiety, depression, personality difficulties, phobias, as being unique things. But they actually typically have one thing in common, which is the experience of a past trauma.
Okay.
Right.
And so what EMDR is particularly good at is working with memories by bringing them forward, and we often see that whatever the symptoms are in the present, it reflects it will link back to a specific original memory, and that's what we readdress, rather than what most people do, which is avoiding those thoughts. During the therapy, we help clients face those memories and get a second chance to work them through.
And I think this brings us to very interesting conversation, because Mark, I think, subtly alluded to that fact, which is the adverse childhood experience, right? And we all experience the moment, especially in our childhood, where there's obviously, as the parents, there's a lot of focus on fulfilling the material needs of the kids, right? So they need to earn more money so that they can give a better living standard to their children. But I think in all of this race, sometimes parents forget that there are also emotional needs that needs to be fulfilled, and they're unfulfilled, and that is why we see, when we talk about the generational trauma or the father trauma or the mother trauma, the underlying cause is that their emotional needs were unmet during their childhood experiences, right? So when we delve deeper into and dissect the concept of trauma, So can you please explain to our audiences what exactly is the mother trauma and the fatherhood trauma, and how it is interlinked with the adverse childhood experiences that resides in our body, and then it forms in the form of the physical symptoms like heart diseases, chronic fatigue and whatnot?
Yes, yes. So as you say, adverse childhood experience is an assessment tool that looks at some of the things that can go wrong in a family. Death of a parent, violence, illness, those kind of things. And so when those things happen, the child reacts naturally, which is often that they're afraid, overwhelmed, confused, and they feel it in their body. And they act in the best way they can. Sometimes they avoid and feel ashamed. Other times they get angry. And those tend to have lasting effects and be reflected in the present. So some people tend to carry what they feel in their body and are prone to illness, and as you say, other times people reenact things that happened in their childhood. So if they felt ashamed, not just occasionally disciplined by a parent, but consistently told they're a bad kid, that will last, and that can lead again to them acting that way when they become parents.
And I think that this is exactly what I think the majority of the children over here in Pakistan have lived with. You know, if you're not going to study, Putter, you know, you're not going to get a job. You know, if you're not going to study, you might not get a good lifestyle. You know, so to have a very Pakistani perspective, there's one other issue, you know, which I would love to address over here, because Mr. Mark, you know, very wisely has spoken that, okay, if you can sleep, that means that you can recover faster and better as well. I think that most of the times the complaint that parents would make over here in our country is that you sleep too much. You know, that's what the problem is. You know, 60% of our generation is youngsters. Unfortunately, majority of them are jobless, unemployed, and this is something which is kind of causing them that distress that they are in as of now.
Yes.
Now imagine
environmental factors.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yes,
so you know, imagine with these environmental factors, and on top of that, it's your parents telling them, or probably their kids, hey, you know what, you need to get a job. Hey, you know what, you know, you need to do this. You need to get married. Don't you think that that itself will add to the stress levels of that particular person or child who's sleeping too much already? Yeah, so how do we look at it?
I think it depends on how we train our parents. And you see,
you know, who can do
so
that?
parent training programs have come up in a big way, and I think in Pakistan we're just on the verge of starting to have them.
And do you think our
be in
parents will
place.
enroll in it?
So anyone who wants to be a good parent, I think that
Yeah,
should be
true,
something that
true,
they
true,
look up
true.
to. And it's basically the only job in the world where you don't need any qualifications to actually raise a child. And I
Exactly.
think that's something
It just happens naturally
that's
anyways.
important, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So in addition to this, I think what is more pertinent to ask over here is, how common do you think psychotraumas are in our country? Because with 60% youngsters in the country, how common is it? Or do you think that, you know, we are still on raising trend or the bar that, you know, probably people will be getting affected with psychotraumas?
Okay, so when you talk about psychotrauma in Pakistan, we have to look at both the natural disasters, because Pakistan as a nation is no stranger to adversity, unfortunately. So EMDR and the concept of trauma initially came to us during the 2005 earthquake, which is when we started to really notice here in our local settings what psychological trauma was all about. And then the floods and all these natural disasters that come up. And then the man-made difficulties, what you're referring to, these interpersonal difficulties and traumatic events. Local prevalence, there have been a few studies, psychological trauma affects about 1/3 of our population, and the numbers do tend to be a bit higher in adolescents.
Right.
And females tend to be more effective and the more vulnerable group.
And I think one thing that stands out in our conversation is that people suffer from it, but they are unable to identify that, acknowledge that, and that is why they don't seek that much sort of a help, right? So now when we talk about solutions, now when we have dissected the concept of trauma, the psychotrauma, intergenerational trauma, generational abuse that has been prevalent. So now let's delve into the solutions of that, and you alluded to the fact that parenting is something that is a very hard job, and it requires a lot of effort, a lot of time, and there are lots of
Especially when you have kids like us.
yeah, parental patterns that you
difficult.
need to unlearn, right? And then you need to relearn. And I think this generation that we label as Generation Z, or you know, I mean whatever the names are, they are different generation to handle, so they throw a lot of tantrums, and obviously as a parent it's very difficult to handle those tantrums, right? And handling those tantrums is actually a way towards a more healthy, taking care of a healthy body and mind. So how do you take care of the tantrums when your child is throwing tantrums? Because there comes a point, when you just want to, shake them off and, behave yourself. So how do you deal with that? You're a human also.
May I refer to
Sure,
Mark?
sure.
Because
Yeah, sure.
his workshop actually focused on some problem behaviors that can be addressed through various techniques. So if I'd like to take
Well,
that question.
I'm a parent, and I know no parent is perfect.
True.
And so
And no child is perfect.
no
either.
child is,
Yes.
no, of course. So to what we were talking about a while ago, every child eventually has a little bit of chance to be on their own. They become an adult. So if they can tell that they've been affected by their childhood, then the therapy may be a place to sort that out. And so when they become a parent, all of a sudden they can a little better see whether they're being their own parent yelling at their kids or they're being their own self.
Yes.
And so EMDR doesn't just work on life-threatening traumas, really any problems in the present that have been made worse by past experiences. It can bring insight as well as relief. So a parent, let's say, who's been bullied as a child may be very touchy if their kid speaks up to them.
True.
Whereas if they felt over being bullied, they realized they were the big adult, they might have a little more patience. And so that would be the personal work they'd have to do to be the best parent possible, not perfect.
Exactly, and I think this is a takeaway from today's program as well. But sir, in addition to this, speaking of your workshop on the 18th and 19th of May, which has just taken place as well, so specifically, you guys have focused on behavior changes as well,
Yes.
or problematic behaviors, anger, addiction,
Yes.
domestic abuse. We have spoken about it as well. Now, imagine that if somebody has got such issues, that if there are people around and they can identify that
Yes.
a person does not behave the way that he or she used to,
Yes.
what do you think anybody should do in those circumstances?
I think characteristic, let's say, of people who get stuck in anger, are chronically angry, they tend to see the problem, any problem, as being somebody else's fault. And so to feel better, they feel they have to make an impression on that person, change that person, manipulate that person, and they tend to be short-sighted in terms of their contribution.
True.
So how one points that out to an angry person is an art. It is not easy, but sometimes people will come to therapy because they've been fired from a job or their spouse has left them because of that.
Yeah.
And so that's an opportunity to say, what else do I feel besides anger? Usually it's embarrassment or shame or fear that they've denied for years and years.
That's true. That's true.
Exactly. And in
I
addition,
think
it's very
it-
sorry, Hajat,
Right.
just one simple thing, because this is something which I guess that I've seen a lot of people do as well. We might have done at some stage of our life. Now, what happens is that we do understand that there's a mistake that we have made, right?
Yes.
Now, what happens is that we start to manipulate our own brain in a way that we kind of make our own version of truth and then
Yes.
kind of stick with it. How do
Yes.
you think that people can actually get over this very ill habit of theirs? Because what happens is that they would certainly blame somebody else for a mistake that they have made and will think of it as a truth or a truthful version of themselves.
Yes, in the workshop I mentioned Ben Franklin, American Ben Franklin. He said, anger is seldom without reason, but rarely a good one. So
That's true.
there is that is built into that. I think one thing that I've learned in this wonderful stay I've had here in Pakistan in the last week.
Do let
is-
us know how it was, though. as well.
It's been wonderful. I visited the large mosque here. I've had a guide that's helped me understand things. And I've come to just appreciate humility as a core part of Islam. And so these are values that lie within most people who have faith. And so what I find is you can't fight with somebody who's angry. You have to help them find a part of themselves that is different than that angry part, so they can begin to separate from it a little bit.
Wow.
And I think Dr. Savera, because of the paucity of the time, so let's move to you. And one last question is that we've seen that people or kids who are highly sensitive with lots of empathy in their heart, they're also absorbing a lot of trauma from around their environment, right? So how to protect yourself, how to just, observe the surrounding and not absorb the trauma around you. And I think as a psychologist, it's also important for you guys to just observe, not absorb, because when someone is speaking about their trauma, it's also the energy transference that is happening at the same time. You know, you're absorbing a lot of it, right? So how to deal with that?
So what you're talking about is vicarious traumatization, where healthcare professionals and mental health professionals need to be aware of that, having that detached concern for people. So you would want to empathize with them and understand their issues, while also making sure that you take care of yourself. If this is the last question, may I please just add?
Sure.
EMDR Pakistan Association, I just need to speak a few lines about it.
Sure, go ahead.
So it's a national association of mental health professionals, and we our aim is to provide high quality evidence based trauma services in the region. We have over 250 registered EMDR practitioners, and we continue to provide trainings to therapists in terms of building their skill set, and we strive to maintain the highest standards of professionalism. And we have a website, emdr.pk, and you would find an updated catalog of our active therapists there, and some general information about EMDR. And in line with these goals, we invited Mark Nickerson for our therapists to be able to interact with international experts in the field and to have these specialized trainings so they can provide help to the communities in need. So I just wanted to highlight the good work that EMDR Pakistan Association has been doing since its inception in 2009, and you know, we will continue to do so in terms of providing trainings and services to the community.
And that's why we had you over here as well. The pleasure is all ours, you know, because we go out in 46 different countries over different subcontinents in the in the world, and that's exactly that we had you over here. We want to certainly pay you rich tribute for these kind of services being able, you know, are available in the country. And thank you so much, Mr. Mark,
Thank you so
for
much.
joining us, coming all the way to Pakistan. Just one simple thing which I will ask you towards the end. What is it that you brought to Pakistan and that you're going to leave behind, and what is that that you will take from Pakistan with you? You know, so I think that's the question which I will.
Well, I will say that we met at a conference in Asia, and I met some of Dr. Severa and her colleagues, and I was just immediately taken by the seriousness, but also the humor of their dedication to this. And over the course of these trainings, I feel like I've known people for a very long time. So I feel like I'm carrying a little bit of their souls and the experiences. And I've had wonderful hosts since I've been here.
And what did you eat over here while you were here? Please don't say biryani. Everybody's been eating biryani.
I ate whatever was in front of me for the most part, but I find that I'm kind of weak on handling spicy food. I thought I could tolerate it, but it's at a higher level here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful to have you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mark Nickerson. Thank you so much, Dr. Severa, for joining us. Wonderful to have you over here. And for everybody who's out there, ladies and gentlemen, you know, for these people to kind of make sure that, you know, such services are available in the country is something which is their initiative. You know, they are either here to make sure that they will be helping other people. But I think that what lies on us as a responsibility is to kind of figure it out ourselves, that God forbid if there's a problem, why shouldn't we go to the experts? You know, we keep on saying that, you know, with a leg fracture or probably an arm fracture, we can see that a person is suffering. But with mental traumas, that's what the problem is, that we are unable to understand. And before it's too late, I think it's better to identify and seek help from experts. And we do have EMDR with 250 or more practitioners over here in the country. So please make sure that, God forbid, if there's a problem, that you get to the right person who certainly will help you right after Allah Almighty as well. With that, we'll actually head out towards a short break. As Hajar mentioned right at the beginning, that from 21st of May till 27th is going to be the heat wave in the country. What do we really need to do is something we will be talking about. And we do know that, you know, just before May, it was a little chilly over here in the country. All of a sudden, it has got down to 42 degrees centigrade. It's too hot. What should we do as humans to protect our planet? Something we will be talking about in the next segment. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much.
And when we started the program, I alluded to this conversation that we are literally feeling the heat in a metaphorical sense too, and in a literal sense too, because we are witnessing the heat wave, that too in Islamabad and Pakistan. and that is going to be intense. And with regards to this particular climatic fallacy, the government has also ordered the closure of the schools from 25th May till 30th of the May. And I think that's a very wise decision, considering the fact that we are getting attuned to such sort of climate abnormalities present inside the country. But when we talk about the trauma in our first segment, when we talk about the environmental factors that are causing it, so now let's delve deeper dive into what sort of climatic conditions are we facing and how to protect ourselves and what are their causes. And especially when we talk about Islamabad, so we were attuned to moderate sort of an environment, but now we are experiencing more extremities in the weather environment. So winter is going to be extremely cold, summer is going to be extremely hot. So what is happening here, how to protect ourselves and how to attune ourselves to this new normal of the climate change. So without any further ado, we are very glad that we have been joined by someone who happens to be an expert in all of these climatic changes, and he has been regular on our show. He's an environmentalist. We are very glad that we have been joined by someone who has been very regular in our program. So without any further ado, we would like to introduce our further very esteemed guest. He happens to be Dr. Ijaz Ahmed Saab. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Right, so Dr. Saab, we've seen these climatic changes. We've seen that we are experiencing a heat wave in the May. So how to, number one, protect ourselves, and what are some of the causes that we're witnessing such a dry and hot weather?
I think overall we all know that globally we are facing this challenge of climate change, and the predictions are there that the temperature will rise, and it is already raised. I mean, like I think in some areas it's close to 2 degrees centigrade, which has actually increased average temperatures. And the global warming phenomena is actually has become a reality now. People initially, especially very developed countries, they were making fun of it, that this is not something which is happening, but now everywhere. I mean, like you talk about Europe, you talk about America, China, India, Pakistan, or South Asia. Everywhere we are facing,
Dr. Saab, we also need to discuss our structures out there, right? So for example, when we talk about the architectures that are in the city particularly, and how they are also contributing towards the climate changes. So we've seen that we are constructing a lot of buildings, right? And they're all made up of concrete. So all of these, I would call it a concrete jungle, because you in the city witness that there's a concrete everywhere. So, and we've seen because of the flooding, because of the extreme concrete jungles, we are witnessing that there's extreme massive flooding, right? And we've seen in the April, because that was the wettest April that we experienced in the past 60 years in Pakistan, right? So how can we adapt or change our architecture that suits the more changed climate realities and that more green in environment?
Well, we actually have changed it to this level that it has become now a problem. And it is very unfortunate that the architect, even like if you go to Karachi or if you go to the northern part of Pakistan, is almost the same. Like the material which we are using in those environment is almost the same. Similarly, what we use in Lahore or in Islamabad or in northern part of Pakistan is almost same. I think the phenomena that you have been talking about is related to urban or heat islands. We are creating more and more heat islands, and we were just talking earlier that just imagine a building, a 10-story building, where 8 to 10 offices are there, and every office will have 3 or 4 air conditioned, and just multiply. I mean, there will be 100 plus air conditioning units, which will be keeping the internal environment cool, but the external outside environment will become more hotter, and that ultimately will form a sort of an area where there will be more temperature, which will actually make the people living in those areas normally, like a common person, will suffer. And that happened in Karachi about, I think it was like 2000. There were close to 2,000 people that died because of the heat wave.
True.
So the more urban environment, we develop, as you mentioned, concrete jungle. So what is happening? More and more people are inhabiting. There is no urban planning. building codes are not to that extent being implemented. So ultimately we are facing these kind of issues.
But sir, in addition to this, there's this counter question as well. Now imagine, because I was in the United Kingdom, a few days ago as well. Right. And even over there, the temperature is not just the way that it used to be. Yes. Now imagine that the maximum that they would go to is 22 degrees, right? And even now, when it's not really summers over there, it went up to 27 and 28 degrees. Now for them, it's not really a concrete jungle over there, and they always make sure that what sort of materials are being used for the construction and whatnot. So we do see it as a global phenomena rather than only precisely with the countries like Pakistan, India or elsewhere in the Asia. So it might play a role, I'm not negating it, but to some extent I think that that we are seeing these or witnessing such abnormal changes globally. Yes. Yes. Why do you think that there's this global phenomena if we are only to kind of dissect it down to the concrete jungles?
I think it goes back to like some of the studies that were conducted, ozone layer depletion, and global warming, carbon dioxide, temperature rise in generally, yes. And these are all linked to the practices that we are doing, the kind of livelihood, the style that we have adopted. Just like talk about Islamabad, that it has expanded to that level.
True.
Where we we had few. I would say less than million people. Now we are talking about 2+ million people. And then people who are commuting on regular basis from outside into Islamabad, and in order to provide services to them, we need to expand roads, because where there is no public transport. If we have a good public transport, still I think there is a good chance that we will reduce this concrete jungle to some extent.
True.
So what is happening is that we need to expand our roads, and in order to expand your roads, you need to cut trees.
Yes.
And that that is the whole game, because I mean, number one, increasing number of vehicles, so which basically means more emission.
True.
Yes.
More warm air, more temperature, and then ultimately reducing the sink, carbon sink,
yes.
By cutting the trees. So there is actually no balance, in a sense that expanding roads is not a solution.
Okay.
And I
Public
think
transport is.
yes, thank you so much for saying that. And when we talk about the rapid urbanization that we are experiencing in the capital like Islamabad, and we are also seeing it in the interplay of a complex interplay of the climate change, I think we also need to talk about, like you mentioned, about the trees and the slaughtering of the trees that is happening, and the new societies that are planting the trees that are not, I would say, what do you call it, the native species
Yes.
of Pakistan,
Yes.
right? So they are mostly planting the trees that are palm trees or date trees, and,
Yes.
and I mean their growth is not very conducive to the environment here, rather,
And the birds won't even make their nests over there as well in those trees.
And it's just for the
It's-
beautification
yeah.
process. So someone who is an expert in the field, please enlighten us that what is that we are doing wrong with the planting of the trees, especially in the new societies.
Yes. You have already mentioned, actually, the plantation itself is something which is very important. The choice of plant,
Yes.
I think, is very important, in a sense that Islamabad again is facing a problem. Allergies because of those species which were actually introduced to
Invasive
Islamabad, and they were invasive also. So these invasive species have taken over the local flora. And the local flora emerges when we remove all those invasive species.
So what are the local species of Islamabad?
There is a long list of local species.
Flora and fauna, right?
Yeah.
No, when we talk about trees particularly, planting of the trees.
Jacaranda is one example.
Okay.
It's a local tree.
Right.
Similarly, Bakain, similarly,
So many of them, yeah.
There are many of them. So, and there is a list which is available actually.
Right.
And what happens is that because of the invasiveness, they overcome the whole environment.
Right.
And as you mentioned that the plants, the birds,
Birds
they won't actually make nest. It's true, because it is the entire ecosystem that changes.
That's true.
Because when you have local tree, local birds will come. And then local birds will feed on many insects which are harmful for human health.
Exactly.
And then they have their own mechanism, pollination mechanism, and all the other thing that is related to the ecology of that particular area. So we are actually, like purposely or necessarily without knowing anything, we are changing the ecology, and it is in the negative way we are changing. So if we change it in a positive way, I think that will be beneficial for the local community as well as for the environment.
Exactly. And sir, in addition to this, I would certainly want you to kind of shed light on, because obviously the cultivation cycles have changed. We have seen that, how, unfortunately this time around, even I was watching it on the news the other day, that we have a shortage of wheat over here in our country, unfortunately. But while we are at it as well, how much do you think that this will have an impact on our food security? Do you think that, that unfortunately we might be coming into or looking at some tougher times ahead? Or do you think that, that it's not such a major issue and that we will be able to kind of recuperate?
Because when it's the plowing season, there's an intense rain, you can't do that,
exactly.
Right?
That is, I think, very important. The issue of food security is very much related to the environmental condition. As you mentioned, I know personally that last year, due to heavy rains, at the time when people were sowing maize crop after a wheat, they could not actually, in some areas, they were unable to actually put the seed in the soil because of the moisture content was very high. And similarly, the situation this year in May, we had, in April, we had rains, and because of the rains, the wheat harvesting was not at time, and then there was a problem with the grain as well. And then in some areas, people had to actually, this even during this week, people are harvesting in this area. So it delayed the whole harvesting process. So that harvesting, again, it will lead to the next crop also. So if harvesting is late and there is not enough moisture, so then the seeding for the next crop will again suffer. So this is a big issue, which is actually, very much related to changes in the climatic conditions.
And what modern solutions do we have, to kind of curb the menace of food insecurity?
I think it's we need to have, long-term solutions, because I think it's not something that we can, change the whole environment in a day or so. And we need to look for options which can sequester carbon, and plantation, afforestation, tsunami plantation is one of the major, I think, initiative that government has taken. And this is something which we will actually find results maybe after a decade or so, because it's not.
Don't you think that would be too late for us to kind of
there are some
solutions after a decade?
Some short measures also, but I think we need to think on both short and long-term basis, because unless, for example, I will go back again to the public transport. Unless we have a very comprehensive public transport system, we will not be able to. More than 80% contribution in the air pollution comes from the transport sector. This is a study which was done in Lahore, and two-wheeler, three-wheeler, public transport, the phenomena of smog that we face every year is becoming more intense and more prolonged. Even we have seen that in Islamabad we get a few days of smog. So we need to take actions as soon as possible. Unless and until we think on long-term basis, I think we will not be able to solve the situation.
And thank you so much, sir, for saying that, because now imagine that if I live in D12 now, so to kind of get to public transport, I'll have to come to F10 anyways, because there's no other means of transport otherwise, so I'll have to ask my domestic staff to kind of drop me to F10, or probably somewhere in the middle of F10 and F8 to get my metro, and then come over here towards work. And then I'm like, okay, if I'm halfway there, why not take my own car? And in other countries, I've seen that you go out of your home or house, and that's where the bus stop is. You just need to hop onto the bus, it will take you to the train station and wherever you need to go. I think such planning really needs to kind of be applicable in days to come as well. We have seen that how irrigation methodology has actually kind of adopted to drip irrigation in order to save water and whatnot. And I think in days to come, we really need to kind of hope on to these practices, learn from the countries who've actually done it and how beneficial it has been for them. But thank you so much, Dr. Saab, for being with us. Lovely to be in conversation with you.
Thank you.
And towards the end, sir, I think that the one thing which I would certainly want to recommend, because it's not the only heat wave which is going to come across. Now, in days to come, in months to come, ladies and gentlemen, we will be experiencing such heat waves. The best idea would be to please make sure that you do not step outside your houses unnecessarily. if you are to go outside, please make sure that you keep a cap, you know, something, keep yourself hydrated, because unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, heat wave can be as dangerous as Hajar mentioned just in the beginning, that in Karachi 200 people or more actually lost their lives in the
2000,
previous
yes.
2000. Yeah, imagine. So what we need to do is protect our children, our family members. If it's too hot, stay inside. Do not step outside unnecessarily. And one more thing, be careful about the people who are on motorbikes and bicycles. Now imagine when you're in your air-conditioned car, it actually leaves a lot of gases which are really warm
yes.
for the people who are standing right next to you. Please make sure that you keep out water, you know, for the birds and whatnot. So, you know, please make sure that there's more of greenery around you as well, which will certainly help you. And as individuals, as Pakistanis, it's our responsibility as well to do better, you know, to protect our planet and to protect our motherland we call Pakistan. Until next time,
It's a goodbye, Allah Hafiz, and good morning.
good morning, and chocolates tomorrow, inshallah.